Welcome back, wanderer. The night has come once more. The world outside has grown dim. The fires of the day have settled to embers, and the long, slow hours of darkness lie ahead of you. There is nothing you must do tonight, nothing to remember, nothing to fear. There is only this, the voice, the story, and the long, gentle drift into sleep. Take a slow breath in and let it out slowly. Feel your body sinking just a little into the place where you rest. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands grow still. Let the weight of the day fall away from you, like cloak slipping from a tired traveler at the end of a long road. Tonight we return once more to the realm of the Old Norse, to the world of gods and giants, of frost and fire, of 9 realms held together by a single ancient tree. But tonight, our tale will not be one of heroes. It will not follow the bright halls of Asgard or the deeds of mighty Thor. Tonight, we follow a darker path. Tonight, we walk with the Trickster, the shape changer, the god who is not a god, the one who walked among the Aesir for 1,000 years, who laughed with them, who feasted with them, who fought beside them, and who, in time, would become their greatest enemy. His name is Loki. And tonight, we will meet his children. 3 children, each one a horror, each one a creature so terrible that the gods themselves trembled at the sight of them. A wolf large enough to swallow the sun, a serpent vast enough to encircle the entire world, and a daughter, half living and half dead, who would one day rule over the kingdom of the dead. These were the children of Loki, and it was their fate, the prophecy said, to bring about the end of all things. But before we meet them, we must first understand their father. Loki was not in truth a god of the Aesir. His blood was the blood of giants. His mother was the giantess Laufey, and his father was a giant named Farbauti, a name that meant cruel striker. Yet despite this giant heritage, Loki had come, in the oldest days of the world, to dwell among the gods of Asgard. He had sworn an oath of brotherhood with Odin himself, the All-Father, the king of the gods. And so, from then on, Loki walked among the Aesir as one of their own. He sat at their feasts. He drank from their cups. He laughed at their jokes, and they laughed at his. For Loki was, above all things, charming. He could speak more cleverly than any other being in the 9 worlds. His tongue was quick. His mind was quicker still. He could find a way out of any trap, talk his way past any guard, charm the truth from any hidden place. When the gods needed a problem solved by wit rather than strength, they turned to Loki. When a great task needed a clever hand, Loki was the one who reached out to take it. And he could change his shape. This was perhaps his greatest gift. Loki could become anything he wished. A salmon slipping through cold rivers, a falcon soaring through the high sky, a fly buzzing through the smallest of windows, a seal swimming through the deep, a horse. He had once even become a mare, and the story of that transformation was one the gods rarely spoke of, for it had ended in a most unusual birth. And he could change not only his form, but his face. He could become an old woman weeping at the side of the road, a handsome young man smiling at a stranger's door, a child lost in the woods, a king, a beggar, a friend. There was no one Loki could not pretend to be. And there was no one, not even the wisest of the gods, who could always tell when he was telling the truth. Now the gods knew that Loki was dangerous. They knew his nature. They knew that mischief followed him as surely as shadows follow a man walking in firelight. And yet they kept him close, for Loki was useful. For every problem he caused, he often solved another. For every trouble he brought, he sometimes brought a gift. The hammer Mjolnir, which Thor wielded, that came from Loki's mischief, you may remember. The spear Gungnir, which Odin carried, that too. The golden hair of Sif, the ship Skidbladnir, the ring Draupnir. All of the greatest treasures of the gods had come, in one way or another, from a problem Loki had caused and then cleverly fixed. And so the gods tolerated him. They allowed him to walk among them. They drank with him and feasted with him, even as they watched him from the corners of their eyes. But the time came when Loki did something even the gods could not laugh away. He took a wife. Not in Asgard, not among the goddesses of the Aesir. No, he took a wife from Jotunheim, from the land of giants. Her name was Angerboda, a name that meant the bringer of grief, and Angerboda was a giantess of great power and great darkness. She lived in the deep forests of Jotunheim, in a place called Ironwood, where the trees were black and twisted, and the wolves of the world were said to be born. Loki visited her, often in secret. He kept this from the gods, for he knew they would not approve. The Aesir had no love for the giants. They had warred with them since the beginning of the world, and they would war with them until the end. For Loki to lie with a giantess, and not just any giantess, but Angerboda, whose very name was a curse, this was a betrayal that even the most patient god could not forgive. And so Loki kept it secret. He came and went in the night. He shifted his shape so that none would see him cross from Asgard to Jotunheim. And in time, Angerboda bore him children. 3 of them. The first was a wolf. Not an ordinary wolf, the kind that hunts in moonlit forests. This was a wolf the size of a hill, a wolf with eyes that burned with old fire, a wolf whose teeth were as long as swords, and whose growl could shake the mountains. The second was a serpent. Not a serpent like those that slither through the grass. This was a serpent vast beyond any reckoning, a serpent that grew day by day longer and thicker and more terrible, a serpent that, even as a young thing, was already large enough to coil around a mountain and squeeze it to dust. The third was a daughter, but she was not a daughter like a bright maidens of Asgard. Her body was strange. One side of her was beautiful, with skin the color of fresh fallen snow. The other side was dark, cold, the color of a corpse 3 days dead. She did not laugh. She did not weep. She moved slowly, and she watched the world with eyes that knew, even at a young age, far too much about endings. These were the children of Loki and Angerboda, and in the deep forests of Ironwood, Loki and the giantess raised them. They grew, they learned, they became what they were destined to become. But news travels, even in the 9 worlds, even in the deepest forests, even between realms separated by mighty seas. And in time, news of Loki's children reached Asgard. News came to Odin, the Allfather, who sat upon his high throne Hlidskjalf, from which he could see all the worlds. He looked toward Ironwood, and what he saw made him cold with fear. For Odin could see more than the present. He could see dimly into the future, and he saw that these 3 children, when they came of age, would be the doom of the gods. They would be the architects of Ragnarok. They would be the forces, when the end of all things came, that would destroy Asgard, devour the sun and moon, and bring the long darkness down upon the world. And so Odin made a decision. Cruel, perhaps, necessary, perhaps, the kind of decision that only a king who carries the weight of 9 worlds upon his shoulders can make. He sent for the children. He commanded that they be brought to him in Asgard. Loki could not refuse. Not even Loki, with all his cleverness, could refuse the All-Father when he spoke with that voice. And so the children of Loki were taken from Ironwood. They were torn from their mother. They were brought across the sea, across the rivers, across the mountains. They were brought to the bright halls of Asgard. And there, in the high seat, where Odin watched the worlds, the gods looked upon Loki's children for the first time. What they saw filled them with dread. Breathe slowly. In and out. Let the image rest in your mind. The young wolf, larger already than a horse, the serpent, coiling and uncoiling, watching with cold eyes, the pale daughter, neither smiling nor speaking, only watching. The gods of Asgard, ranged in a great circle around them, their hands tight upon the hilts of their weapons. And Loki, standing apart, his eyes lowered. For even Loki, who feared little, could not look at his children when the gods looked upon them. What followed would shape the fate of all the worlds. The first child the gods turned their attention to was the wolf. His name was Fenrir. When the gods first saw him, he was still young, still a cub by the standards of his kind, but already he was larger than any wolf the world had ever known. His back rose higher than a man's head. His paws were the size of shields. His eyes, yellow, ancient, watched the gods with an intelligence that no ordinary beast could possess. The gods did not slay him. Perhaps they could not. Perhaps something held them back. Pity or uncertainty, or the knowledge that Fenrir was, after all, the son of a god they called brother. Instead, they decided to keep him, to raise him in Asgard, where they could watch him, where they could measure his growth, where, if the prophecy proved true, they could deal with him before he could deal with them. But Fenrir grew. He grew faster than anything the gods had ever seen. Day by day, he was larger. Week by week, he was faster still. Month by month, he became a thing of impossible size. His shoulders began to brush the rafters of the great hall. His teeth, when he yawned, were longer than spears. His shadow, when he walked across Asgard, fell upon entire courtyards. And as he grew, the gods grew afraid. There was only one among them who would still approach the great wolf, only one who was not afraid to bring him food, only one whose courage or whose sense of honor was strong enough to walk near those terrible jaws each day. His name was Tyr, the god of justice, the god of law, the god of honor. Tyr was a warrior of great skill, but he was known above all for his integrity. He kept his word. He spoke truth. When he made a promise, he kept it, no matter the cost. And every day he came to Fenrir. He brought meat. He spoke gently. He looked the great wolf in the eye, and he was not afraid. Fenrir came to know Tyr, to trust him after a fashion. But trust between a god and a wolf the size of a mountain is a fragile thing, and the gods, watching from a distance, knew that the day was coming when even Tyr would not be able to approach Fenrir safely. The day was coming when Fenrir would have to be bound. The gods met in council. They debated. They argued. They consulted the wisest among them. And in the end, they made their plan. They would bind Fenrir with a chain, and they would do it through deception, since they could not do it through force. The first attempt was a chain called lading. It was the strongest chain the gods could forge. Heavy iron, thick as a man's leg, link upon link of unbreakable metal. They brought it to Fenrir, smiling. "Great wolf," they said, "we have heard tales of your strength, but we wonder, could even you break a chain such as this? Surely no creature could. Will you not let us bind you just to test it? Surely you will break it easily, and we will marvel at your power." Fenrir looked at the chain. He looked at the gods, and he saw nothing to fear. Why should he fear a chain? He was the wolf son of Loki. His teeth were swords, and his strength was the strength of mountains. He agreed. The gods bound him. Lading was wrapped around his great body, link by link, knot by knot. They stepped back. Fenrir flexed his shoulders. The chain creaked. He pulled. The chain stretched. He strained, just for a moment, and lading burst apart like rotten thread. The pieces flew across the courtyard. Fenrir laughed, a low, rumbling laugh that shook the ground. The gods withdrew. They forged a second chain. They called this one Dromi. Dromi was twice as strong as Lading, made of finer metals, forged with greater skill. They brought it to Fenrir with the same smiles, the same words. "Great wolf, surely you cannot break this one. Will you let us try?" Fenrir looked at this chain, and he was wary now. He could see that it was stronger. He could feel a dark intent behind the words. But his pride was great, and he was still confident in his strength, and so he agreed once more. They bound him with Dromi. He pulled, he strained, he used all his strength. And Dromi held, For a moment, for a long, long moment, Fenrir's muscles stood out like ridges. His breath came in great gasps. The chain bit into his fur. And then, with a sound like the cracking of the world, Dromi shattered. The pieces flew so far they were never found again. The gods knew now that no chain of metal would hold Fenrir. They turned to magic. They sent messengers to the dwarves of Svartalfheim, the master craftsmen, the makers of impossible things. "Make us a binding," the gods said, "not a chain. Something else, something that even the strongest creature in the 9 worlds cannot break." The dwarves agreed, and they made what the gods asked for. What they made was called Gleipnir, a binding so unusual that none who saw it could believe what it was made of. Gleipnir was a ribbon, soft as silk, thin as a thread, light as a feather. It looked like nothing at all. A child could break it, you might think, by simply pulling. But the dwarves had made it from 6 things that did not exist. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. These were 6 things that, in the old days, had been parts of the world. But because the dwarves had used them to make Gleipnir, those things were gone. A cat's footfall makes no sound because the dwarves took the sound. Women cannot grow beards because the dwarves took the beards. Mountains have no roots because the dwarves took them. Bears have no sinews because the dwarves took them. Fish do not breathe because the dwarves took the breath. Birds have no spittle because the dwarves took it. All of these things the dwarves had taken from the world and woven them together into a single soft ribbon that no force in the 9 worlds could break. The gods brought Gleipnir to Fenrir. But this time, Fenrir was not so easily fooled. He looked at the soft ribbon, he smelled the dark magic upon it. He saw the smiles of the gods, and he understood now what they were trying to do. He spoke. Even Fenrir in those days could speak. "Why should I let you bind me with this?" he asked. "There is no honor in such a thin ribbon. If I break it, it proves nothing. If I cannot break it, and I sense the magic upon it, then you have tricked me, and I will be your prisoner forever." The gods had expected this. They had prepared for it. They told Fenrir, "Then we ask only this. Let one of us place a hand inside your jaws, as a pledge, as a sign of our good faith. If we have tricked you, you may bite off the hand. We will not take it back." Fenrir considered. He looked from god to god, and he saw in their eyes that none of them, not Odin, not Thor, not Heimdall, none of them was willing to place a hand in his mouth. They were all afraid. They knew the trick. They knew what would happen. Fenrir laughed. "So you ask me to trust you," he said, "but none of you will trust me with so much as your hand. You ask me to be bound, but you will not bind yourselves to truth." There was silence. And then, slowly, one figure stepped forward. It was Tyr. Tyr, the god of honor, the god of justice, looked at Fenrir, and he did not look away. He walked to the great wolf. He raised his right hand, and he placed it slowly into Fenrir's enormous jaws. Fenrir held it, gently, patiently. He did not bite down. The other gods came forward. They wrapped Gleipnir around Fenrir. The soft ribbon, light as breath, settled around the wolf's body. They stepped back. Fenrir flexed. Gleipnir held. He pulled. Gleipnir grew tighter. He strained with all the strength that had broken Lading, that had broken Dromi, that had broken every chain ever placed upon him. Gleipnir did not yield. It did not stretch. It held him as if he were a newborn pup, helpless in his mother's mouth. Fenrir realized he had been deceived. His eyes went wide, his muscles tensed. He looked at the gods around him, at their faces, which were no longer smiling. He looked at Tyr, whose hand was still in his mouth. And in his rage, in his terror, in his grief, Fenrir bit down. Tyr's hand came off at the wrist. The god of honor did not cry out. He stepped back, the blood pouring from his stump, his face calm. He had known this would happen. He had known the price, and he had paid it willingly, because no other god had been brave enough. The gods bound Fenrir then with the ribbon Gleipnir. They drove a great sword through his lower jaw and into the roof of his mouth, so that he could not bite again. They placed him in a deep cave, far from Asgard, where he would be hidden. They tied Gleipnir to a rock so heavy that nothing could move it. And there they left him. Fenrir lay bound, his jaws frozen open, his body still. The blood that flowed from his mouth, the saliva of his great frustration, ran down through the cave and out onto the world. It became a river, the old stories say. A river that flows in dark places, that runs always toward the end of the world. And there Fenrir would remain, bound, silent, waiting, until Ragnarok. For the prophecies said that on the day of the end of all things, Gleipnir would break, Fenrir would rise, and he would seek, with all the patience of his long captivity, the one being he held responsible for his fate. Not Tyr. Tyr had paid a price. No. Fenrir would seek Odin, the All-Father, the King of the gods. And on that day, the great wolf would devour him. But that day was not yet. That day was still ahead, and the gods for a time could rest. Breathe slowly, in and out. Let the image of the bound wolf settle, the deep cave, the silent jaws, the waiting eyes. Some chains, the old stories teach us, hold for a season, some hold for an age, and some, they whisper, hold only until the time comes for them to break. The second child of Loki was a serpent. His name was Jormungandr, and from the moment the gods first saw him, they knew he was something they had no power to keep. Where Fenrir had grown swiftly but visibly, Jormungandr grew differently. He grew constantly. He grew without rest. As an infant, he was already as long as a man. By the time the gods had finished their first council about him, he was as long as a great hall. By the time they had decided what to do with him, he was longer than the road from Asgard to the gates of the world. It became clear very quickly that no place in Asgard could hold him. No cave, no vault, no prison the gods could devise. The serpent was too large. He grew too fast. He would outgrow any container they placed him in within a matter of days. And there was something else, something the gods sensed in him, something cold. Where Fenrir was wild, full of hunger and rage, Jormungandr was patient, watchful, ancient, even in his youth. He did not snap, he did not bite. He simply coiled and watched and grew. The prophecies said that this serpent, when he came of age, would be the doom of Thor, that at the end of all things, Thor and Jormungandr would meet in battle, that they would kill each other, that this was the fate written and could not be unwritten. The gods could not let him grow free, but they could not contain him. And so Odin, in his wisdom, made a different choice. He took Jormungandr, already so large that 10 gods together could barely lift him, and he carried him to the edge of the world, to the great encircling sea that surrounds the realm of Midgard, the sea where no land lies, where the deep waters reach down to places no eye has ever seen. And Odin cast Jormungandr into that sea. Down the serpent fell, down into the dark waters, down into the deep. And there, in the cold and the silence, Jormungandr began to grow as he had never grown before. For the sea was vast. The sea had no walls. The sea had no end. The sea would let him grow forever. And so Jormungandr grew. He grew for months. He grew for years. He grew for centuries. He grew until his body wound around the entire realm of Midgard. He grew until his great length encircled the world like a belt of darkness beneath the waves. And still he grew. In time, he grew so vast that there was nowhere left for him to grow. The world is only so wide, the sea is only so long. And when Jormungandr had wrapped his body around the entire earth with no room left for any more length, he did the only thing he could do. He bit his own tail. And there he holds it. To this day, the old stories say, Jormungandr lies beneath the waters of Midgard, his great body encircling the world, his teeth fixed upon his own tail. He is the world serpent, the Midgard serpent, the Ouroboros of the Old Norse. He holds the world together, or he holds the world prisoner. The two truths, perhaps, are the same. And he sleeps mostly. He stirs sometimes in the deep. Storms rise on the surface when he stirs. Great waves break upon distant shores. Ships are lost. Sailors whisper that the serpent is moving below them, and they pray to whatever gods they keep that they will reach harbor before he wakes. And in the long centuries of his rest, Jormungandr remembers. He remembers the bright halls of Asgard, where he was first brought as a young thing. He remembers the faces of the gods who looked upon him. He remembers, in particular, one face. A face with a red beard, a face with thunder in its eyes, the face of Thor, who had looked upon him then, and who had seen, even then, a creature he would one day have to fight. For the prophecies were clear. When Ragnarok came, when the end of the world began, when the sky split, when the great wolf broke free, when the fires of Muspelheim rose, Jormungandr would loose his tail. He would rise from the deep. He would lift himself up, vaster than any mountain, more terrible than any storm. And he would meet Thor on the field of battle. They would fight. Thor would strike with Mjolnir. The hammer would crash upon the serpent's head with such force that mountains would shatter elsewhere in the world. Jormungandr would lash with his great tail. The serpent would bite. And in the end, Thor would slay him. The great serpent would fall. But it would not be a clean victory. For as Jormungandr died, he would breathe out his last breath upon the god of thunder, a breath of poison, the deepest, oldest poison of the deep waters, the venom that had been brewing in his fangs for 1,000 years. Thor would stagger backward. He would take 9 steps. And on the 9th step, the protector of gods and humans, the wielder of Mjolnir, the friend of mankind, he would fall dead. This is what the prophecies said. This is the fate that Jormungandr carries with him, even now sleeping in the deep. And once, only once, in the long age between his casting into the sea and the day of Ragnarok, Thor would meet him before that final battle. A fishing trip, a line cast into deep waters, a great serpent pulled briefly to the surface. But that, you may remember, is a tale we have already told. For now, Jormungandr sleeps. The world is safe. The waves rise and fall above his sleeping body, and far above, on the surface, the sun rises and sets, and humans live their small lives, knowing nothing of the great serpent that holds the earth in its coils. Breathe slowly, in and out. Let the image of the great serpent fade gently, the dark deep, the vast coiled body, the teeth fixed upon the tail. Some things sleep for 1,000 years. Some things sleep until they are needed. And some things, the old stories say, sleep only because the time of their waking has not yet come. The third child of Loki was the strangest of all. She was not a wolf. She was not a serpent. She was a girl, a daughter. Her name was Hel. When the gods first saw her, they did not know what to make of her. She walked on 2 legs like a goddess. She had eyes and a mouth and hands. She seemed, at first glance, almost ordinary, but only at first glance. For half of Hel was alive, and half of her was dead. One side of her body, one arm, one leg, one half of her face, was as any living being. Her skin was pale, but warm. Her eye was bright. Her hand could grip, her foot could walk, her voice could speak. But the other side was not. The other side was the color of a corpse left too long in cold ground. The skin was gray, mottled, wrong. The eye was sunken, dark, sightless. The hand was stiff. The flesh sometimes, in certain lights, seemed to peel away from the bone. She was beautiful and terrible at once, half maiden, half death. The gods did not know what to do with her. She was not violent, like Fenrir. She was not vast, like Jormungandr. She did not threaten the realm. She could not, in any obvious way, be the doom of the gods. But there was something about her that made even the bravest of the Aesir uncomfortable. The way she watched them, the way she did not laugh, did not speak, did not weep, the way she seemed to know things that none of them had told her. She was a child of Loki, and she was something more. Odin the All-Father looked upon her with his single eye. He saw what she was. He saw what she would become. And he made his decision. Hel was given a kingdom. Far below the realm of Midgard, far below even the deepest roots of Yggdrasil, lay a place that had always existed but had never had a ruler. A vast realm of shadow and silence. A realm where the dead went when their lives were done. Not the warriors who died in battle. Those went to Valhalla to feast with Odin. But all the others, the ones who died of sickness, the ones who died of old age, the ones who died of grief, of accidents, of cold, of hunger. The ordinary dead, the countless dead, the dead who outnumbered the living by 1,000 to 1. This realm had a name, Helheim, the land of Hel, and from this day forward it would have a queen. Odin sent Hel down through the long roots of the world tree, down past the wells of memory, down through the cold and the dark, until she came to her kingdom. And there, in a great hall built of mist and silence, she took her throne. Helheim was vast. It was not a place of fire and torment like the hells of other faiths. It was not a place of judgment. It was simply a place where the dead came and where they remained, a place of stillness and quiet and gentle forgetting. Hel ruled there. She was a fair ruler in her way. She did not torment her subjects. She did not punish them. She fed them, and she gave them shelter, and she allowed them their slow, eternal rest. But she was cold. She did not love them. She did not hate them. She simply kept them, as a shepherd keeps a flock that has long since stopped needing tending. Her great hall was called Eljudnir, which meant the rain-damp hall. The food she ate was called hunger. The knife she ate it with was called famine. Her bed was called sickbed. The curtains of her bed were called glimmering misfortune. Even the things in her hall had names that spoke of slow decline, of patient ending, of all the ways that lives wind down to silence. She had servants, a man named Slow and a woman named Slowness. They moved through the hall with the deliberate pace of those who know they have all of eternity to complete their tasks. And outside her hall ran the great river Gjöll, which the dead must cross when they came to her kingdom. The river was bridged by a gate of golden lattice, watched over by a maiden named Modgud, who asked each new soul their name and their business before allowing them to pass. Beyond the gate, a path led downward through gray mists until it came to the great hall of Hel herself, and there she received them, one by one, without comment, without judgment. She showed them their place at her table, and she let them rest. Hel was, in her way, the most patient of all the rulers in the 9 worlds. For while Asgard rang with feasts and battles, while Midgard echoed with the lives of mortals, while Jotunheim shook with the tread of giants, Helheim was always quiet, always still, always waiting. And in time, every being from every realm would come to her, every soul save those few warriors who fell in battle and were taken instead by the Valkyries. Every other death, every other ending, every other story that ran its quiet course, all of them came eventually to Helheim, to Hel. And she received them all. There would come a time, the prophecies said, when even Hel would stir from her long quiet, when even her cold realm would empty out and her armies of the dead would march. On the day of Ragnarok, when the world ended, Hel would rise. She would lead her dead, countless legions of pale shades, out of Helheim, up the long routes to the surface world. She would fight in that final battle against the gods, and the dead would fight beside her. But that day was not yet. For now, Hel sat upon her throne. She received the dead, one at a time, as they crossed the bridge of Gjöll. She gave them a place, and a great quiet of her kingdom continued, as it had since the beginning, and as it would until the very end. Breathe slowly, in and out. Let the image of the pale queen rest in your mind, the half-living, half-dead lady upon her throne of mist, the great quiet hall, the slow river Gjöll, and the patient gatekeeper, and the long line of souls waiting to cross. Death, in the old Norse tradition, was not a thing to be feared. It was a thing to be passed through, a door to a quieter realm, a place of rest. And there is wisdom, perhaps, in seeing it that way. Wisdom in remembering that even endings are not always violent, that some endings are gentle, that some endings are simply rest. For a long time, Loki walked free among the gods. His children were bound or banished or set upon thrones in distant realms. Fenrir lay in his deep cave. Jormungandr coiled beneath the sea. Hel ruled over the dead. And Loki himself, the trickster, the shape-changer, returned to the halls of Asgard. He sat at the feasts. He drank with the gods. He laughed when laughter was called for. But something had changed in him. Perhaps it was the loss of his children. Perhaps it was the slow recognition over centuries that he was not truly one of the Aesir, that he never had been. Perhaps it was simply his nature, the dark thread that had always been in him, growing slowly stronger as the years passed. Whatever it was, Loki began to change. His mischief, which had once brought treasures and laughter, began to bring only harm. His tricks, which had once been clever, became cruel. And in the end, Loki did something the gods could not forgive. He killed Baldur. Baldur, the most beloved of all the gods, the shining son of Odin and Frigg, the bright god whose skin glowed with soft light, whose laughter brought warmth, whose presence made the very flowers bloom where he walked. Every being in the 9 worlds loved Baldur, gods and humans, giants and dwarves, animals, even the stones of the earth. But Loki, alone in all the universe, did not love him. Loki saw him perhaps as something he himself could never be: bright, loved, easy. And in his bitterness, in his slow-rotting heart, Loki found a way to bring Baldur down. The full story of Baldur's death is a tale for another night. But know this: Loki was responsible. Loki engineered it. Loki guided the hand of the blind god Hod, the unwitting brother who fired the killing arrow. Loki laughed in secret when Baldur fell. And the gods knew. In time, the truth came out. In time, the gods understood what Loki had done, and their patience, which had endured 1,000 years of his mischief, finally broke. Loki fled. He ran from Asgard. He took the form of a salmon and hid in a deep pool beneath a waterfall, in a place far from the halls of the gods. But the gods came after him. They wove a great net, for the trick of the net, ironically, had been Loki's own invention. They cast it into the pool. They caught him, and they brought him to a deep cave, a cave far below the earth, a cave from which there would be no escape. There they bound him, not with chains, not with rope. They bound him with the entrails of his own son. For Loki had 2 sons by his wife in Asgard, the goddess Sigyn, a son named Vali and a son named Narfi. And the gods, in their cold vengeance, transformed Vali into a wolf. The wolf, mad with the change, fell upon his own brother Narfi and tore him apart. And from Narfi's body, the gods drew the cords that they used to bind Loki. The cords hardened, in time, into iron. They became chains that no force could break. They bound Loki to 3 great stones, 1 stone beneath his shoulders, 1 stone beneath his hips, 1 stone beneath his knees. And there he lay, stretched between them in the cold dark of the cave. But that was not the end of his punishment. For above him, the gods placed a serpent, a great venomous snake. They fixed it to the roof of the cave directly above Loki's face. And the serpent, day after day, dripped venom from its fangs, burning, terrible venom, the kind that eats away at flesh and at thought and at memory. The venom dripped onto Loki's face, and he screamed. But Sigyn, Loki's wife in Asgard, who had borne him 2 sons, who had been faithful to him through all his years, Sigyn did not abandon him. She came down to the cave. She brought a great wooden bowl. She held it above Loki's face, catching the venom before it could reach him. And as long as she held the bowl, Loki was at peace. But the bowl in time would fill, and Sigyn would have to turn away to empty the bowl. She would walk to the side of the cave, pour out the venom, and return as quickly as she could. But in the moments while she was away, the venom would drip again upon Loki's face. And he would writhe, he would scream, he would convulse so violently that the very earth would shake. The mortals, far above, would feel the ground tremble. They would say, "There is an earthquake today." They would say, "The world is restless." But it was only Loki, bound in his cave, crying out beneath the venom of the serpent. And there Loki has remained, the old stories say. All these long centuries, all these long ages. Bound, faithful Sigyn beside him, the serpent dripping above, the cave dark and cold. When the earth shakes, the old Norse said, "You are feeling Loki's struggle." When the wind howls in a strange voice, you may be hearing his cries. He is not gone. He is not dead. He waits. For the prophecies said that this binding too would not last forever. On the day of Ragnarok, when the wolf breaks free, when the serpent rises, when the dead march forth, on that day Loki's bonds will also fail. He will rise from the cave. He will leave Sigyn behind. And he will lead an army of the dishonored, sailing in a ship made of dead men's fingernails to the final battle. There he will face Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, his old enemy. They will fight. And in the end, they will kill each other. But that day too is not yet. For now, Loki lies in his cave. For now, Sigyn holds the bowl. For now, the gods rest. And so we have come tonight to the end of our tale. The story of Loki, the trickster of Asgard, the story of his 3 terrible children born in the deep forests of Ironwood, the story of the wolf and the serpent and the Lady of Death, the story of how each of them was given their fate and how each of them waits, even now, for the day when their fate will come due. These are old stories. They were told 1,000 years ago by firelight in the cold halls of the north. They were told to children who grew up to tell them to their own children. They were carved upon stones. They were sung in long songs. They were whispered in the dark. And somehow, after all the centuries, they have come down to us. They have reached you here, tonight, in this quiet hour of your own life. You have traveled far, wanderer. You have walked into the deep forests of Ironwood and met the children of Loki. You have watched a wolf grow too large to hold. You have stood at the edge of a sea that holds a serpent in its depths. You have crossed the bridge of Gjöll into the realm of hell. And you have looked into a cave where a god lies bound, weeping beneath the venom of a serpent, while his faithful wife holds back the worst of his suffering. These are dark tales, but there is comfort in them too. For every binding, the old stories say, has its time. Every creature has its place. Every silence is, in the end, only a long preparation for the words that come after. And there is comfort, too, in knowing that in the long age between the binding and the breaking, life continues. The gods feast, the mortals love, the seasons turn, the stars wheel overhead, just as they wheel overhead tonight, far above the place where you rest. For now, the children of Loki sleep. The wolf in his cave, the serpent in his sea, the lady upon her throne. And their father, bound beneath the dripping serpent, sometimes still. The world holds them gently, while they wait. And so too can you rest. Let the dark tales soften like coals cooling in a hearth. Let your body sink just a little deeper into the place where you lie. Let your thoughts grow slow and your eyes grow heavy. The gods are at peace for tonight. The bonds hold. The world endures. Until then, rest well